Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. You're Tom. Tom, for everyone out there listening, please introduce yourself and also tell me a little bit about the JFK assassination.
Oh, for sure. Well, I'm Tom Graham. I'm a relatively new researcher of the case. I got interested kind of around the 50th anniversary back in 2013. That was also the first time I watched Oliver Stone's movie, JFK. It's just an amazing piece of cinema, and that's kind of what spurred my initial interest. Started reading every book I could get my hands on. Eventually read John Newman's Oswald and the CIA. And after that, just like books weren't really cutting it anymore, I guess. So I started to do like primary document research, looking into the Warren Commission volumes. Got a Mary Farrell Foundation membership and just started reading everything I could. And then what took my interest even like the next level, it wasn't even the Warren Commission volumes. I started flipping through the FBI headquarters file on the assassination and just seeing just, on paper, just how many good leads were never followed to completion. Some of them just deliberately cut off, and all the information just in that file that are not in the Warren Commission volumes and certainly not in the Warren report was kind of mind-blowing. And in doing that, I developed a specific interest in the FBI investigation into tracing the alleged assassination rifle from Dallas all the way back to Italy. And people say Mexico City is a black hole. It's like, take a look at the rifle investigation. This is evidence very complex, archaic, like at times excruciatingly boring, but still pretty interesting. And I got a lot of killer stuff in the works on that, but I've been waiting on a document request from NARA for, I don't know, several months now. They're backed up due to COVID. But in doing that, I started noticing all of these references to Post Office Box 2915 that didn't fit in at all with the official story, and also references to post office records, specifically change of address orders that officially didn't exist and were never entered into evidence. And just for anybody who doesn't know, that PO Box 2915 is Oswald's Dallas post office box where he supposedly ordered the alleged murder weapon back in March 1963.
I just Googled that. I didn't know about the PO box number. But hold on, before we get into the whole mailing thing real quick, the Warren Commission and a lot of the FBI files, I was looking through the 2021 archives, and also I decided to go through the National Archives and just look through every single thing from chapter 1 all the way to 6. It took me most of the night. We say like it's not. I think what we expect a normal investigation. We expect like very, very. To me, they're thorough as hell. But I think they're thorough in parts that they probably just really completely weren't paying attention to. And when I mean they weren't paying attention to is because they were avoiding where to be super thorough. They were like, let's put a bunch of information in these documents. And a lot of the information is like, why the hell are they tracking the second niece's daughter who left and got 3 times removed from the family? You're kind of like, does none of this make sense? I mean, that's kind of like my whole point of this is like, I'm not trying to expose anything. A lot of these experts are really trying to like, yeah, you're going to have your evidence, but I mean, a lot of people want to like solve the case. I'm just coming at it like we need to start raising like our critical thinking aspect a little bit when it comes to just raising a flag at something. I mean, we know about 46% of the population at the time thought there was conspiracy with the assassination. There's probably more people that think about it a lot more now. But I mean, when we talk about it, like when me and you can talk about it because we're interested in it, but the general public kind of wants to nod their head and walk away. And it's kind of like this is an important thing you should raise flags at, because then you'll start raising flags at other scenarios that pop up later in time. And I mean, this whole case has been a mass amount of confusion, just with all the different angles and all the different information. It seems clouded, even when you read some of the documents, where I start going, when you feel like you're confused about what you're reading and you read it again and it seems like it sinks in the second time, it's legal speak. And that legal speak is the most trickiest thing I have ever come across, where you read it correctly the first time, the reason why it didn't make sense. But then when you read it the second time and it does make sense, it's like you're, oh, this is what they meant. No, 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 no. They want you to think that, and this is how it's got to go. And then when you talk like that, people go, oh, you must be a tinfoil hat. And that's the scary part to me. You need to question these things, and that's why I really appreciate that. Even you mentioned off air, like being interested in the mail thing. It kind of seems like a weird part to be interested in. It's an important part, because those little details can sometimes be crucial matters on things. And one thing I'm highly confused about is when it comes to Oswald being CIA, there's a rifle and a receipt to the rifle, and it says Hidell on the receipt. And then people are like, oh, if you change it around, it's Oswald's it's a cryptonym for Oswald. And it's like, dude, I don't know what the hell and where are we going with this? Like the whole mailing thing, please continue where you're going. Take me down the route when it comes to the mailing. Like how'd you get started? Like what was your first step?
Oh, sure. Well, first thing I really noticed when I was looking into the rifle was that the earliest reports on PO Box 2915 said that the box was rented in the name of Mrs. Lee H. Oswald and or Oswald's mother. And well, the official story in the box application and evidence, of course, has it in Lee Oswald's name. So what the heck's going on here? And the way this came about is an FBI assistant director, Alex Rosen, reported it to his superior that the box was being used by Mrs. Lee H. Oswald up until May 10th, 1963. He said nothing about Lee. This guy, Alan Belmont, then calls Gordon Shanklin, the FBI special agent in charge of the Dallas field office, running the whole investigation down there. He tells Belmont he sent his agents to the Dallas post office, who verified that the box was rented in the name of quote unquote Oswald's mother. And so now that the information was verified, it ends up getting reported to the highest levels of government for over 24 hours after the assassination. The head of the Secret Service, J. Edgar Hoover himself, reported it to the White House through Lyndon Johnson's aide, Walter Jenkins. And it's like these guys aren't idiots. Like there has to be some explanation for why this happened, like whether it was a mix-up or what. So that's what kind of initially piqued my interest there. Then I mentioned briefly a minute ago, I was also seeing all these references to change of address forms that were never entered into evidence and officially didn't exist. And so I started digging into it, found a great collection of records of the Postal Inspection Service and the John Armstrong Archive at Baylor University, and those aren't on Mary Farrell. And I think I found some pretty interesting stuff. So give a little background first. The official story is that Oswald closed that post office box on May 14th, 1963, via a change of address form that changed his address from that box to his apartment in New Orleans. The address for that was 4907 Magazine Street. That's the official story. That's what's in the Warren report. And nothing else happened. Well, I noticed that that form does not have an endorsement written on it by a postal clerk. And I didn't really know what the significance of that was, so I started looking into it and also corresponding with some formal postal workers who were worked there prior to computers, and everything I found was pretty much universal. It's saying that it means that the form was rejected. It was never processed. It just didn't happen. And I'm like, okay, what the heck? And so, and then I found extremely compelling, I think, about as close to solid proof that you can get at this point in this case, that that was true, that it was never processed. And so we found out that, well, the first time this official change of address form is reported is on the night of the assassination. The FBI reported through Postal Inspector Harry Holmes, who people are familiar with the case will know all about him, kind of a notorious figure. And so, but he reported that, he found that change of address from box 2915 to 4907 Magazine Street at the Dallas Post Office. But he also reported that he found a change of address form dated May 10th, 1963, so 4 days earlier, from Mrs. Lee H. Oswald, changing her address from P.O. Box 2915 to Ruth Payne's house, which is 2515 West 5th Street in Irving. So this May 10th change of address form for Marina officially doesn't exist. It's never entered into evidence, disappeared. It was only reported this once on a teletype sent on the night of the assassination. And May 10th, 1963 is the exact same day that Ruth Payne drove Marina down to New Orleans to meet up with Oswald. So the evidence suggests here that Payne stopped off at the post office with her and had her file a change of address to her house. Either says she wouldn't, miss any mail, or just that she didn't think that she'd be staying in New Orleans very long and coming back or going back to Payne's house. And so again, this form disappeared, vanished. So I kept looking a little bit, and that also, just real quick, that corroborates what Alex Rosen initially reported. He said the box was being used by Mrs. Lee H. Oswald up to May 10th, 1963. And he said nothing about Lee on this earliest report on P.O. Box 2915 from a high-level FBI source.
Well, how are you viewing this? Are you viewing this as maybe as a mail slip up that some of these forms weren't filed, or are we tackling the angle that they might have been an FBI informant involved in the mail office?
Oh no, I think, well, there was an FBI informant involved in the mail office. Harry Holmes was an FBI informant, and I think I identified who his handler was as a special agent named Alfred Ellington in doing all this. And it was no accident that these forms disappeared. They were just deliberately suppressed. And might think that Marina's changes of address might not be relevant to the assassination, but there's change of address forms from Oswald's mom dating back to 1961 in evidence. And so these disappeared for a reason. And I think what really reflects that is that a form for Oswald disappeared too. This is kind of the biggest or most significant piece of evidence for what I found, is in the records of the Postal Inspection Service. It shows that at the request of the Secret Service, 2 postal inspectors were dispatched to Irving to check with the post office there on the afternoon of the assassination. And they found that Oswald had filed a change of address form dated May 15th, 1963, that changed his address from Ruth Payne's house to 4907 Magazine Street in New Orleans. This form also disappeared, was never entered into evidence. And what makes that, I think, even worse is that it was the first document after the assassination to lead investigators to New Orleans. It's the first indication that Oswald had lived there. The FBI knew that, but they they never didn't follow that lead until after these postal inspectors found this form. And the Postal Inspection Service actually got a jump on the FBI because of that. And these same two postal inspectors in the report say they turned the form over to the Secret Service. Again, it disappeared. And so, taken in sum, the lack of endorsement on the May 14th form and the two forms that disappeared, it's pretty clear that what happened was Marina, there's an option on this form for that says entire family or firm, and what that does is it changes the address of everyone with the same last name who's listed on the box application to the new address. And so it's pretty clear that she did that. And what happened was Oswald's mail, along with her own, were forwarded to Ruth Payne's house on May 10th. Oswald sent in his May 14th form. He actually mailed it on May 9th from New Orleans, but by the time it got there, Marina had already changed his address and closed the P.O. box, so it gets rejected. There's your explanation right there for why there's no endorsement on the form. And then the May 15th form, which Oswald mailed the same day his other form was rejected on May 14th from New Orleans, was sent in as a correction so he could get his mail down to his apartment. And the evidence suggests that he probably didn't know Marina had done that and was maybe even a little bit upset about it, because that same day, May 14th, he goes to the post office in New Orleans and separately changes his address with all his subversive subscriptions. So like the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, the Militant, the Soviet Embassy. He changes his address separately with those places to 4907 Magazine Street, which he didn't even have to do because he sent in his correction form, which would have all his mail routed from his Dallas P.O. box to Ruth Payne's house to his New Orleans apartment. But what this does is it cuts out the subversive mail from being routed through Ruth Payne's house. So it looks to me like he didn't want any of that mail getting misdelivered there. So this is about as rock solid as it gets for evidence in this case at this point, that this is really what happened, that Marina checked the box for entire family or firm, closed the box, sent the family mail to Payne's house, and then Oswald had to correct it and send it a new form to the Irving post office to get his mail down to New Orleans. This was all covered up. Those forms were deep sixed, I guess. And so I started looking into it a little more and kind of tried to trace how it was covered up. And there's a document in the Warren Commission volumes. It's Commission Exhibit 1799. That's the official report provided to the Warren Commission by Postal Inspection Service on assistance rendered in the assassination investigation. And what it says in that report with regards to change of address orders, well, it only mentions the officially non-existent May 15th change of address from Ruth Payne's house to New Orleans, of course, because that was the only change of address to New Orleans that was actually valid. The other one was not endorsed by a postal clerk. And the report was compiled from all of the initial reports submitted by individual postal inspectors. And then it was created through a series of drafts until they eventually got their final draft and sent it to the Warren Commission. Well, the ARRB in the 90s released the drafts of Commission Exhibit 1799. And what the drafts show is that Harry Holmes, the guy who found the official change of address, the May 14th one that was never endorsed by a postal clerk and rejected, he said he gave no details whatsoever. It's the worst report I've ever read. And so he doesn't say like what the actual change of address was from, but he does say that a change of address was entered from the box to New Orleans. That's in his initial report. And so through the drafting process, that Holmes's initial report was changed just to say they removed the part from the box. They added that the form was discovered by postal inspectors, plural, and then they just said that a form, generic form, was entered to send mail to New Orleans. So, and if you look at the draft, it's pretty clear that they systematically edited it to remove any reference to the invalid change of address order while they were putting together this report to the Warren Commission. And I think this is speculation, but their report was requested in January '64. They were worried about providing incorrect information to them and implying that an invalid change of address actually forwarded Oswald's mail. And then also in Holmes's initial postal inspector report, he says that he turned over the original change of address form to the Secret Service. The official story on the official May 14th change of address form was that Holmes gave it to the FBI, that his handler, and I think Holmes basically confirmed this himself, that Ellington was his handler, by the way, in the 90s, on the 23rd. Never went through the Secret Service. He did official stories. He gave nothing to the Secret Service. And so why the heck would he write that in his report? So in the first draft to Commission Exhibit 1799, the inspection service actually changed it to say that he did give the form to the FBI. And then in the final, or by the final draft, they changed it back to show that the form had been given to the Secret Service. And of course, the May 15th form found by the postal inspectors in Irving was given to the Secret Service, and it was deep sick. So once again, we see the exact same strategy of revising report to remove any reference to this invalid form, and that's by the Postal Inspection Service, as they're the authority on this kind of thing, to know what actually happened. And so the question remains there is, what the heck did Holmes actually give to the Secret Service? And I think it's pretty clear that what he gave them was the May 10th change of address form from Marina that closed that box. He gave that to the Secret Service, and he gave the May 14th form for Oswald to the FBI. And there's more evidence for that as well. But when it came time to talk about all this under oath to the Warren Commission, well, first off, one way that evidence is authenticated is that it's a witness will testify essentially to its uniqueness under oath, like whether it's been initialed or marked, or it's just a unique item in general, where they can testify, be like, that's what I found, that's the same item. And then they'll describe what, describe the evidence. And so you would think that, given how this May 14th change of address is the official story for how Lee Oswald's mail gets forwarded from Box 2915 to New Orleans, that Harry Holmes would describe it under oath. And also the form in evidence has his initials on it and the date, November 22nd, 63, which reflects that's when he pulled it out of post office records. And so that's not really what happened. He didn't authenticate it. I'll actually read what happened. And so,
well, when we're talking about, like, just to kind of stop you right here, because you give me a lot, but when it comes to speculation on this, how do you not know if this is just like government covering up something, if it's the post office covering their own ass so nobody gets fired? I mean, when you mentioned about the Paynes, for instance, and you talk about Miss Oswald changing her address to the Paynes house, Miss Payne's story, she talks about driving Miss Oswald all the way up to New Orleans and then driving back. And she even says, like, I don't think she wanted to stay there. So obviously you can speculate here, but probably on the car ride home, they talked about her living in New Orleans and seemed like she wasn't ready for that. And then she probably drove her to the post office to get a change of address over there. And the reason why I bring this up is if I know that story behind it, but you can speculate there were the Paynes involved, and that's where people say like that's why the mail was showing up at the Paynes house. But if you look at like how Ruth Payne talks about Oswald, she goes, he was not allowed to stay at my house. But apparently there were instances where he was there at times where you start wondering she was probably very lenient with having him over, but he could not spend the night, or there were certain scenarios where he wasn't allowed to stay for an extended period of time, which is why he's like, I don't want my private shit going to her house. He's probably trying his hardest to get Marina out of there, but she's trying to keep Marina there to do the and this is where like rumors spread that she was like going through like some type of lesbian phase. I don't buy any of that, but you get to this aspect, they probably developed a close relationship, her and Marina Oswald, to a point where she really was going to be sad if Marina left.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, that's an excellent point, and totally agree, because Ruth Payne, to this day, has never once been asked about this change of address form filed on May 10th. And she almost certainly drove Marina to the post office that day. This is the same day they drove down to New Orleans. And since Marina supposedly didn't speak any English, probably helped her fill out the form. And she's never been asked about it. Um, and when neither has Marina. And as actually speaking with Jim Eugenio about this, and it's maybe the reason for that change of address is that like Ruth had it in her mind from the outset that, or the both of them did, that Marina would be coming back to live at her house. Whereas Ruth's official story was that wasn't the case. It was a spontaneous thing. She offered again, like to bring her back to Irving to have her baby when she was coming back from her vacation in September. So that's a really, really good and interesting point.
I think you just have to put a lot of weight what people would say is manipulation or like spontaneous, what maybe in her words. I go, instead of looking at it from like a CIA operative type move tactics, look at it from a woman who just divorced and separated with her husband and now is lonely and they've developed a relationship. I mean, I have friends over for like a week or 2 weeks. I don't want them to leave. I want the party to keep on going, but people got to go home and shower and shit. So it's like, there's that aspect you have to keep in mind, which is the how people think when they get connected to someone. They necessarily don't want, at first it might be like, oh, I got these people staying with me. But then after a while, you're like, I'm going to miss this and I don't want to be alone. So I tackle it from that aspect.
For sure. No, no, I agree with you. I mean, and I think like a lot of what can be interpreted as verification on Ruth's part in her testimony is maybe not so much like a nefarious cover up, as just like she was kind of worried about looking bad or something like that, because I can see that reflected in some of her testimony. And I think that there's a very strong case to be made that she withheld critical information from the Warren Commission. But I'm not sure how far I'd really go beyond that, or really speculate as to why, just because there isn't enough concrete evidence to back it up, I guess, as far as motive. But that actually happened for whatever reason, like there's a very strong case to be made there. And as far as when she came back and or when Ruth brought Marina back to Irving in September of '63, I actually have some good stuff on that too. I can go into a little bit. There's more more shenanigans with postal records going on once the Oswalds get to New Orleans and back. But real quick, and so on this, the rejected form that is used by the Warren Commission as the official explanation for how Oswald's mail gets to New Orleans it's a lie. It's a flat out lie, and they knew it. And under oath, when it came time to talk about this, I can just run through this real quick. So David Bellin asked Harry Holmes, all right, what was the next thing you did in connection with the investigation of the assassination? So here's Harry Holmes. It's like, well, throughout the entire period, I was feeding change of addresses as bits of information to the FBI and the Secret Service and sort of a coordinating deal on it. But then about Sunday morning at 9:20, Mr. or David Bellin cuts him off. Pardon me a second. Discussion off the record. Anything else now, Mr. Holmes? Well, I might cover the rental of the post office box in New Orleans. Do you want me to go into that? All right, go ahead. So that's the only testimony on record about how Oswald's mail gets forwarded to New Orleans. David, it goes off the record, skipped over. Holmes admits to giving changes of address to the Secret Service, whereas that is completely contradictory to the official story. And that's just kind of the icing on the cake there.
Coincidence.
Yes, exactly. And so getting into New Orleans, and so the on June 3rd, Oswald opened up post office box 30061 at the advice of Fair Play for Cuba Committee Chairman Vincent T. Lee. And so the sole purpose of this P.O. box is to support Oswald's phony chapter of the FPCC in New Orleans. It's not really a normal mailing address to begin with. And so the official story is that Oswald never filed a change of address from his New Orleans apartment, it's like 4907 Magazine Street, to the New Orleans P.O. Box, P.O. Box 30061. And there's very compelling evidence that the official story is actually correct on this point. Oswald did, however, arrange for specific mail to be sent to that P.O. box, and it was all his subversive mail again. He changed his address separately, not through the post office, different forms, sent it directly to these places, with the worker, the militant, the FPCC, and the Soviet embassy to have mail sent to that box. Then he also just gave out that address in New Orleans to various places. But he never made that his primary mailing address with the post office. So any mail that was being forwarded from box 2915 to Ruth Payne's house to 4907 Magazine Street would stay and continue to be delivered to 4907 Magazine Street. When the Marina and Ruth go back to Ruth Payne's house at the end of September, Oswald filed a change of address from box 30061 to Ruth Payne's house. And so per the official story, the only mail that should have been forwarded was that mail that Oswald specifically arranged to be sent to that P.O. box. All of his other mail would have been left behind, like his Russian newspapers and magazines that were being forwarded through the post office. Well, this was a big problem for the Warren Commission, because they knew that all of Oswald's regular mail was being delivered to Ruth Payne's house while Oswald and Marina were in Dallas, and they had no explanation for it. Well, on the afternoon of the assassination, a postal carrier from Irving told the same guys who found the May 15th change of address, by the way, that he took over the Irving delivery route in late July 1963. And when he took over, he wasn't told about Oswald's change of address from Payne's house to Magazine Street in New Orleans. So he started delivering Oswald's mail to Payne's house in late July 1963, based on Marina Oswald's May 10th change of address for the family from box 2915 to Payne's house. And this guy was just very credible. He specifically recalled delivering mail while Payne was on vacation. He recalled a specific conversation he had with Payne when she got back. He also mentioned that somebody regularly emptied her letterbox while she was on vacation, which is really interesting. She was never asked about that, but anyway. And so this is a problem for the Warren Commission, because they can't use this guy as an explanation for how Oswald's regular mail ends up at Ruth Payne's house, because if they did that, they'd have to acknowledge a change of address form that officially didn't exist, already been deep-sixed. And so Ruth Payne gets asked during her testimony by Albert Jenner, when did Oswald's mail different from the worker and the militant, which he arranged separately to be sent to that PO box and would have been forwarded to her house. She's asked specifically when the different mail started to arrive at her home, and she gave one of her most like fumbled, awkward answers in probably her entire testimony. And she eventually, or she says it arrived sometime after October 4th, but she says that that was, of course, her judgment and a rationalization. I mean, she wouldn't have known if it started getting there earlier anyway, because she was on vacation. But either way, and so the Warren Commission, again, even after Payne's testimony, had no explanation that they could use, at least, for how Oswald's regular mail would end up at Payne's house in October 63. And so Marina, on the other hand, she did forward her mail to box 30061. And there's compelling evidence that she did not use the option for entire family or firm again. Oswald, she probably learned her lesson from the first time, and forwarded her mail alone. The FBI reported that she filed a change of address to that New Orleans post office box on the night of the assassination. Deep sixed, never entered into evidence, disappeared. They also reported that she canceled that change of address on October 11th, 1963, and rerouted her mail to Payne's house. And so that cancellation form also never gets entered into evidence, disappears. And so in July 1963, Harry Holmes gets called back in to testify again, or July 1964, sorry, gets called back in to testify again to the Warren Commission, this time by Wesley Liebler. And he brings with him a cancellation form dated October 11th, 1963, rerouting mail from box 30061 to Ruth Payne's house, but it's in the name of Lee H. Oswald. And so this cancellation form is supposedly canceling a change of address for Oswald that he never filed. This exact same form was reported on the day of assassination as being in Marina's name. It was never entered into evidence. It never went through the FBI. Harry Holmes held onto it himself and brought it directly to the Warren Commission 9 months later. And so right there is pretty solid evidence that the form was maybe tampered with a little bit, and the name was changed from Marina's name to Lee's. Well, if you look at the actual form, it's Holmes Exhibit 3A. The words on the form, Lee H, it says Oswald, Lee H, and there's also a notation next to it that says 5/14/63, which is the official date he closed his Dallas PO box, which is a lie, in my opinion. Well, it's pretty obvious, like clear, that it was written in different ink. It's a completely different shade of ink and much darker than all of the other writing on the form. And so I thought this form had to be tampered with before I even looked at it, just based on the fact that it's canceling a change of address that Oswald never filed. It was reported in Marina's name, and then it disappeared. And so, but there's right there on the Forbes, pretty clear, compelling evidence that somebody tampered with it, that they altered it, that the name Lee H was added in after the fact, and written with a different pen. This form's it's not in Oswald's handwriting. First off, there's a postal clerk who supposedly sent it, named Richmond Tankersley. He's the same postal clerk in New Orleans whose initials appear on all of Oswald's post office documents from New Orleans. The FBI never talked to him. No, the Warren Commission never talked to him. Nobody did, except Jim Garrison talked to him during his investigation. And Garrison thought that his writing was very different than the writing on the form. So maybe it was filled out from scratch. I don't know. But either way, I think it sure as heck didn't belong to Oswald. I think that form was altered and used as an excuse for how Oswald's regular mail ended up at Ruth Payne's house in October '63. So they wouldn't have to use the postal carrier who said he screwed up or he was never told about the change of address. And if they did that, they'd have to acknowledge evidence that had already been deep sixed. And so, yeah, again, it's called Holmes Exhibit 3A. If you look at it, just compare the letters or the words Lee H and 51463 to everything else in the form, completely different color. And so the net effect of all of this disappearing and uh, potentially manipulated evidence is to conceal the fact that Marina Oswald had filed her own change of address orders with the post office, and also that she had access to and was listed on the box application for PO Box 2915. That's the Dallas box that the rifle supposedly went to. And so that's the net effect of all this disappearing evidence, is that the investigators, like, I guess, wouldn't have to acknowledge that she had access to that box. Well, Harry Holmes supposedly, or he sits in on Oswald's final interrogation in the Dallas police station right before he was killed. And Holmes wrote a report on that interrogation on December 17th, '63, where he writes that Oswald said he was the only one, or he didn't order the rifle, et cetera, et cetera. However, he had also, or he had taken out 2 keys to that box, and on occasion he had loaned one of the keys to Marina to pick up his mail. Well, the Warren Commission, FBI, everybody had no evidence whatsoever that Oswald had actually gone to the post office to pick up the package for the rifle. There's no receipt there. There's a report from the Postal Inspection Service that says that words to the effect of, despite exhaustive inquiries, we were able to find no evidence of, or anybody who remembers turning the package over to Oswald, whatever.
Well, that's because the package was dropped off at the Payne's house.
Well, maybe. Well, that's actually a good point, because like on that kind of gets into the actual post office box application, but there's an option on section 3 of the form where you can route physical packages to a mailing address, and section 3 of that form disappeared. It's generally been speculated that it was deep six to hide the fact that the name A. Hidell was not on the box application. I disagree with that. I think the name A. Hidell actually was on the box application. But
well, that's more the conspiratorial side from the people I've talked to on the CT side. They talk about how a package was dropped off at the Payne's house and it didn't even have the correct address for the Payne's house on it. It was a different address.
That's a different thing. That's the Nixie package that gets found after the assassination. So I'm talking about the rifle. Like that gets sent in March '63, like the alleged assassination weapon. They had no evidence. Nobody could remember ever handing that package over to Oswald. So there's a break in the chain of custody. They didn't know how it got from the post office into Oswald's hands. And so with Harry Holmes writing his report, and the Warren Commission had this, saying that Oswald on occasion gave one of the 2 keys to Marina to get his mail from the box, you'd think they would have asked her, is it possible that she might have unwittingly picked up a large package at some point? And that would have closed the gap in the chain of custody, and they'd have a completely innocent explanation for how Oswald got the rifle from the post office. Well, when Marina Oswald was interviewed by the Warren Commission, or in her testimony, she was asked exactly 0 questions about PO Box 2915, or they never even asked her if she knew anything about how Oswald had acquired the rifle, whether it was through the mail or whatever. This is unconscionable. They have exhibits in their volumes that they knew that Marina received all her mail at that box. They knew that Oswald had said through Harry Holmes that he'd lent her a key on occasion to get his mail. So even if you ignore all of the missing change of address forms. They Any honest investigator would have asked this woman if it's possible she could have gone and picked up a box in the post office. They didn't ask her. They deliberately avoided it. Marina actually brought up on her own the use of a PO box during her testimony, and the commission immediately switched to a different subject. It's absurd. And knowing there were two keys to the box, also that she had been to the post office to literally pick up mail there, you'd think she would have been asked if she always had the key in her possession, if anybody else could have known about the box, someone could have taken the key without her knowing it. And most importantly, I think they would have interrogated every employee at the Dallas post office to see if they remembered an attractive young Russian woman, probably stand out like as much as anyone could in 1963 Dallas. None of this was ever done. So they avoided the topic of the box and the rifle purchase like the plague with her. Under not a single question. They didn't even ask her how Oswald had received his mail in Dallas. And this is an investigation where two alleged murder weapons were allegedly ordered to a shared post office box in Dallas. And they asked the wife zero questions about it, nothing. It's insane. And I think the reason they did that is that well, first off, they didn't want her to let slip something that would have contradicted the official story, like about the change's address or something like that. But also, I think they were scared to death of Marina letting slip something that could be construed as a reasonable doubt during her testimony that Oswald had actually received the alleged murder weapons, the rifle and the pistol. And she could have easily done that, and saying that, yeah, maybe, I had a key. Another reason why this is just so unbelievable is the supposed Walker note that Oswald, Ruth Paine turned over after the assassination, a cookbook or whatever it was, that supposedly proves that Oswald took a shot at General Edwin Walker in April 1963, in April 10th. And so the first part of that that letter says that here's a key to our post office at the main post office on Irvay Street, and then he gives directions on how to get there. So you'd think the commission would have asked Marina when's the first time that she learned about that PO box, at least if anything in the context of the Walker note. They didn't ask her. Again, they avoided it like the plague. And it's just one of the biggest investigative failings, at least like with Marina, that the commission did. And these were smart lawyers. Like, to think this wasn't intentional is delusional.
Yeah, but to say, when you say failed investigation, I think you have to think they had other things on their mind of how they wanted to investigate this thing.
Oh yeah. So, and it's also another interesting detail is, like, they didn't even show Marina the rifle purchase order forms. They showed her the pistol order forms and then told her it was the form used to order the rifle. So they didn't even want to show her the form that Oswald supposedly used to order the rifle at the post office. It's nuts.
Well, how long? Well, real quick, how long's the gap from the mail going to the Payne's house? Like, for Oswald's mail being delivered to the Payne's house, what's the time period on that? Like, how long has that been going on?
So I think that the postal inspector from Irving was telling the truth, and that Oswald's mail started getting delivered to Payne's house in late July 1963. I doubt he actually had any mail delivered back in May when Marina changed the family address there for a couple days, because he very quickly sent in his correction form to the Irving post office and changed his address to his New Orleans apartment. But the official story is, oh, good.
Well, I would say, would you say roughly probably 3 months that it had been delivered to the Payne's house?
So that would have been what, August, September, October. Yeah, 3-4 months. But
How
the
often?
official,
Well, hold on. How often do you think the mail is probably delivered? You think like maybe like twice a week, 3 times a week?
I honestly don't really know. I guess it just depends on what would have showed up and how it was delivered.
Because I'm trying to
Like,
think, everyone brings up the example of the panes in the magic garage. I go, imagine you're getting some person's mail to your fucking house that you don't like, and the reason why he's not staying there. She's probably tossing half of his shit in the garage and just piling it up there.
oh, well, that brings up something really interesting. Is after the assassination, Payne destroyed Oswald's mail while he was still alive. She testified that as soon as she saw the backyard photographs on TV that were found in her garage earlier that day on November 23rd, she and in those the backyard photographs, Oswald's holding up copies of The Worker and the Militant, the two diametrically opposed, socialist communist newsletters. He's holding them up along with the rifle and the pistol on his hip. It's the most incriminating thing ever. And so she testified that as soon as she saw this with him holding it, she went to Oswald's mail. She had saw copies of The Worker and the Militant, the specific magazines he's holding in the photos, and she threw them away. And I think she also slipped up. She said that there was like a pile of mail there, that was sitting on the couch for him, that weekend, that he never picked up. The police somehow didn't find this pile of mail in multiple searches of her house, and it all disappears. She destroys it after the assassination and admits to it. When she's asked why, her official answer is why not. And
She should be arrested. What the fuck? That's an illegal
well,
thing.
no, it's literally an illegal thing. It's true. I mean, I don't know if she was up to speed on postal law or anything, but it's kind of hard to come up with an innocent explanation for why she would do that under
Look,
those circumstances.
if cops come to her door and she says, "Do you have a warrant to come in?" then she's definitely up to code on you don't burn somebody's fucking mail, you don't destroy somebody's mail. But I was trying to figure out because there's always this talk of a magic garage, and I go, they're not just planting evidence in there. There's probably something more of an obvious answer, which is an aspect. If you look at, you don't like this guy, you're probably tossing the mail where you can't see it, or you're getting rid of it somehow. And the garage is a great way. And then eventually she's probably just started going through the garage and coming across new things that she thought might add to the investigation.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's very plausible.
But I don't think she realized that the CIA and everybody else was probably trying their hardest to bury all that shit. So every time she's like, there's a new this, unless it was like crucial shit, they're like, fucking keep your mouth shut.
And with the mail, like she later testified to destroying a Russian magazine too, and that kind of ties into the mail forwarding stuff because there would have been two different like readdressings on that mail, and one of them at that time before the cancellation forum was altered and just spun by Harry Holmes as something legitimate. They had no explanation for that other readdressing. I don't know if that's an explanation for why it was destroyed or what, but it's kind of interesting. And Payne also changed her story multiple times on this mail destruction incident. Like she testified unequivocally that no mail for Oswald arrived after the assassination, and that she destroyed the mail on the 23rd. And she testified to that twice with slight differences between. When she talks to the FBI, and this is in late July 1964, and this was 1 week after she had just testified to this for the second time. She says that, well, she tells one story and then they re-interview her because she contradicted herself. The FBI sent people back because what she said didn't make sense the first time. So in early August, and she now says that mail for Oswald arrived up to a week after the assassination, and that she destroyed the mail up to a week later, instead of what she had already testified to under oath, that she destroyed it immediately after seeing the backyard photographs on TV, on November 23rd.
That's Well, that's why I put so much weight in the controlling aspects of just her personality rather than the aspect of her being a CIA op. Is the issues that you have with the stories or her testimonies or her any of her interviews as she does, every single interviewer has talked about how she controlled the room. Like I had Max Good on here. He was like, "Yeah, she kind of controlled the interview in a sense." And I go, "It's not that she's trying to stick so much to a story. It's just that when you see these gaps where people say she's sharp as a tack, but I've seen plenty of interviews where she skips over a question and goes to something else, like a pre-planned thing. And I go, because that question you just asked, it's not that it's like incriminating. It's just that if she is trying to avoid the main thing, which is her reputation, she's trying to avoid damaging that and people going like, you put this into your own hands and you destroyed somebody's mail, like, oh, because of this, then what happens, the only answer that you can choose is that she's doing something for the government. And that to her, like if that starts going that way, she's like, is that a safer bet than making me look like a controlling person? Maybe in her mind, that's necessarily it. I don't know. I'm like I said, I don't think the Paynes are 100% innocent, but I think that there's definitely a lot of room in there to think about the controlling aspects of somebody's personality. And I mean, I bet you the night that Oswald was killed or the night of the assassination, when Marina changed her address to the New Orleans location and that one went through, I bet you that was a talk that Payne had with Marina Oswald. And I did bring that up with Max Good. I said, the night that that all happened, what was the conversation that went on? And it was like, we need to go our separate ways type deal. So I go, she definitely forced Marina to like, you need to get out of my house. Like at this point, and I think she wanted nothing to do with them, but obviously she has police rolling through, and now her whole life has been photos, interviews, and everything else.
Right. No, I totally agree with you. I mean, I don't think there has to be some like very like super sinister motive for a lot of this stuff with Payne. Like even her lying to the FBI about destroying this mail. I mean, it could just be like she didn't want to make herself look bad and she was worried about getting in trouble. They could have covered it, like put that in there for her. She didn't even have to say it. They could have just written a false story in their report. We don't know.
Well,
But
imagine
she
64 and being, or imagine 63 back then, and imagine you're in you're in Dallas, and you're now being linked into a person who was harboring a person that killed the president. You want any cameras, any info, any dirt out of your fucking house. That means if you got to go through that magic garage and give all the whatever you think could be evidence away, or you go in your backyard and start a little bonfire.
Mhm. Well, yeah, I mean, that's something that was brought up by another researcher is maybe like she was worried about having associations with like an alleged communist who was getting all these subversive publications to her house. However, I mean, that kind of contradicts like how she approached all of the other evidence in the case, where she happily turned it over to the FBI. And I would be more willing to buy that if she had given an actual explanation for why she destroyed the mail other than playing dumb, and why not. Even the Warren Commission was suspicious. Albert Jenner was like, I think that you would might have wanted to inform the FBI about this once you saw that you found a couple copies of the magazines that Oswald's literally holding in these backyard photographs with the murder weapon of the president. So why didn't you tell the FBI? And she's like, well, why not? And then she's like, and then Jenner's like, well, you didn't. Well, so you didn't tell him, and she's like, no, and that was the end of it. So like, if she had actually given an explanation, then I'd be more willing to buy that. But she didn't, and so if she was embarrassed or something, that's still somebody who's withholding information and not telling the whole truth. Again, it doesn't have to be some sinister motive or anything like that, but it's definitely reason to be suspicious
Christ, I
about.
dread checking my mailbox for mail whenever I see a fucking bill, and everyone else back then seems to be so obsessed with their goddamn mail. I'm like, I'm sorry, you're explaining all this. I'm like, I'm starting to realize the power of the fucking postmaster. Jesus Christ.
For sure. Seriously, no, I totally agree. And so, and again, I don't think she like, I'd be willing to believe she didn't know like that was a specific crime, which it was. But it's still something that's deserving of scrutiny. Let's put it that way.
I bet you she knew, but I bet you she was so fucking angry. I would be, I know so many people that do shit and they're like, oh my God, I didn't mean, like OJ. You think he meant to kill his wife? Allegedly. No, he was just fucking pissed at whatever happened at the time and he lost control. So, I mean, that's why he's out on Twitter right now doing hello, Twitter world, talking about fantasy sports and shit.
And that absolutely makes sense. And then like her, subsequent change of story could have just been to cover her ass because she felt bad about it, and so not everything has to be like some nefarious,
there is a lot of
plot
it
by
though.
intelligence
There is
operators. Oh,
a
absolutely. Oh,
lot.
totally.
There's a lot of
And
stuff where I'm like, well, this is interesting to me was that during the 2021, like I said, I was looking through, I'm not looking through older stuff. I'm looking through a lot of newer stuff only because I think newer generation might as well look through new documents. Everyone else has enough evidence behind them to look through, the old stuff. They spent years doing this. I'm not going to be able to do in 2 months what people have taken 10 and 15 years to be able to do. But when I was looking through the 2021 documents, I came across a lot of things, and especially interrogation tactics as well too. And there's a document labeled LSD that did talk about that you can revive Rockefeller old style interrogation methods if you're not getting the answers that you would deem answerable, I would say, or that fit the narrative of whoever was interrogating. And CIA, the issue with the interrogations that I started seeing in the documents was they had a lot of legal speak in it, but what they did put in there was that no CIA operative could interview someone about CIA operations because that would just skew whatever testimony that person was going to give, unless it happened to be something with covert abilities overseas. And a lot of the interviews that they did with Avardo, and it actually links a lot. The 2021 documents, what I realized is a lot of information on Mexico. They have a summarization of how it wasn't Oswald in Mexico and that it was wrong information. It was actually a fabricated story by an agent named Avardo, who was a Nicaraguan intelligence. And this guy, the way that they interrogated him, they talked about like, unless it's overseas, actions or something like that. Well, that's an overseas action. So that means you're now saying that you can use LSD on this person to get whatever thing you had. And they had a method. They said three plans. Plan A, if anything he says is going to give information to the intelligence agencies that he's a part of overseas, that means he needs to be put in protection. B, if he gives you a little bit of information, but not enough to fully make him a defector of the intelligence agency operations that he's involved in, you have to stay there and keep questioning him. And three, if he gives you no response, no answer to any of the questions that you need or any information that you would deem viable, you put him in the fucking ice box. And that is a quote they have in their document, icebox, and they go into detail about what the icebox is, but they kind of like code it. They talk about the cell, like he'll have a cell with some cable, he'll have cell with some lighting, they'll have a cell, and they explain the toilet. They get really descriptive on this stuff. But I found all this stuff super interesting because when you're looking into it, you start realizing it's like, when people bring up the point of Marina Oswald being forced in interrogations, look at the interrogations that they did with Oswald. There's 40 something hours or something of interrogations they don't have any fucking files for. Where you start going, you would think that that'd be something important to keep a file on. And you start realizing when you look in the documents, everything's in legal speak, but if you read it like a couple of times, you start realizing they're giving escape routes for the way that they can abuse their power by doing things that are unethical in a sense if they deem this person as some type of rogue spy. And if you look at the mailing issue that we're talking about here, how much of that mailing cover up and all that hiding of documents that apparently don't exist but they do exist is just so you can pin them in a spot to make sure that your narrative fits. I mean, even in
that's
the
exactly what it is.
yeah, in the 2021, there was a lady that sent an article from like 1973, because there's this talk of like Oswald apparently having ties to the CIA, but there's no documentation on the CIA or Oswald working for the CIA. Well, a lady from a research review board, not the AARB, but a different research intelligence review board, sent a letter saying, we have an important interview from one of your CIA agents, Dmitriev or something like that. It's Dmitriev or something like that. It's a weird name, but he talks about talking to a person who in the 1950s worked at a radio factory in Minsk, and it fits Oswald's description. And that guy has said his interview and said his testimony on multiple different papers. And then 3 years later, that document was released. And that document does show the person's quote of him saying that. So you do start going, okay, then maybe he did talk to Oswald. And then in the 2021 documents, they have a release of Oswald's CIA intelligence files that he did interview for the CIA, where I start going, look into what people blame at the CIA. They don't necessarily blame the intelligence agency, they blame individual actors in the intelligence agency. So is it hard to think that someone interviewed Oswald and realized he would be a perfect asset as an unwilling, or if he got caught and killed, nobody would give a shit, and somebody picked them up and funded him on to be able to go to the Russia, be able to do all these types of things, and that's his CIA intelligence blueprint, is that an individual actor had placed that upon him. Obviously, that's a lot of speculation, but there are definitely documents that could push it that way. And I start going, I think this is what's I like I said, I'm new into the research, but I'm doing my fucking research, man. It's interesting shit.
Very, and you make a great point about the documents too. I mean, this is such a great time for, I think, new people that get into the case, not just for new document releases, but for Biden's order when he continued to postpone the rest of the documents. He added in there an order to National Archives to digitize the entire JFK collection. And so there are thousands and thousands, like so much material that has never been online. It's only been accessible if you physically go to NARA, and all that. It's probably going to take them a few years, but once this stuff gets released, I think it's going to be a complete game changer for research. Like just the FBI field office files alone have so much stuff in them that was not sent to the bureau. It's not on Mary Farrell. Like barely anyone's ever looked at this stuff. So even the documents that have already been technically released, there's just such a just mounds of material that nobody's really ever looked at and been able to look for patterns and find correlations. And like you said, it's such a rich, interesting topic, and the access to the public information is about to increase dramatically in the next few years. That the more people that can get interested in it and will be parsing those documents when they become available, the better. And I'd be willing to bet, I mean, new breakthroughs and connections and just a better overall historical understanding of the case will happen once those documents become available to everybody. And so, yeah, I think what you're doing is really important, just interviewing people and kind of drumming up public interest, and researching it yourself. But there's really no better time. This is going to be the biggest, I think, change in calculus of the case once these documents become available to everyone since the AIRB. And really looking forward to it, because like I said, right now I've been waiting 3 months on, like, I don't know, 3 dozen documents I ordered. I had to pay $100 for it to get them sent digitally to my email from NARA. So 3+ months just to get that stuff, to fill in gaps on the FBI investigation into tracing the rifle. And those documents, I mean, I know, like, I don't know exactly what's in them, but I know the topics of them and like their dates and how they tie into other things. And those documents are necessary for a complete historical understanding of that aspect of the investigation. And I think the same kind of deal is going to apply to the entire case once all those documents are out there. Because yeah, right now it's just a pain in the ass. It's massive. But anyway.
Well, Tom, I wrapping up here, I want to give you a minute to be able to promote your links. I really appreciate the time you've given me to be able to do the podcast and run me through some things. I'm going to talk with you a little bit off air because I got some plans going on, but where can people find some of your links?
Oh, sure. And so my main essay on the mailbox information is called Rethinking Oswald's Mail. It's on Greg Parker's website. He published it. Well, that's where I did some of the research, but he posted it. He has a list of essays on his personal website, which is gregrparker.com. And then I can get the specific link here. It's gregrparker.com, and then if you go into the menu, there's an option called for Blogster, and it's essays, and then you'll see it for Rethinking Oswald's Mail, but I'm getting the direct link right now. Let's see. Oh yeah, it's just gregrparker.com/rethinking/ or dash Oswald's dash mail, and that's it. And then also on Jim DiEugenio's site, kennedysandking.com, and his there's a link to my essay and his part 2 of his review of the assassination and Mrs. Payne, Max Good's film. And so there's a link there as well. And I have quite a few other writing projects in the work, but this is the only one I've published so far. So if anyone's interested, that's where to find it. gregorparker.com/rethinking-Oswald's-mail, or part 2 of Jim DiEugenio's review of the assassination and Mrs. Payne on kennedysandking.com.
Well, I'll make sure I'll link it all in the description, Tom. Seriously, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I'm excited to talk. I got to tell you some things off air, but thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.